The next video in our video series on creating an app in using Java to store volunteers. In the last video, what we did is we looked at the ability to take a volunteer and store them in the database. So in the last video, we created this Wilma Flintstone character and stored it in the database just by running our insert into database method. So if you haven't watched the previous videos, watch the videos earlier in this series first to get an understanding of how this works. In this video, our goal is to create a simple GUI, or simple graphical user interface, that will allow users to create a new volunteer. And then we'll store that, we'll run this command to store it in the database. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into the views category. I'm going to right click and say new empty fxml. And I'm going to call this new user view. I'll use a Java controller. And the nice thing about doing this is our naming convention is new user view controller. So this is the controller that operates the view. And click next. We can use a cascading style sheet. And let's create a new one. It's called volunteer CSS. And then what we can do is we can use this volunteer.css file to style all of our pages, so we get some global global CSS. So when you create a view, it creates 3 files. First one's an fxml file, and as you can see here, it's only got one thing in it called an anchor pane. And its default size is 400 pixels by 600 pixels. And then it also has what's called a controller. Now in this case, our controller only has one method that does nothing. But this is where we'll put our actual Java commands to interact with our view. And then one of those will be to create a new user and to store that new user in the database. So let's go here over to project side. Now, if you've installed Scene Builder, by double-clicking on your fxml file, it should launch Scene Builder. It's taking a second to come up here. There we go. And the layout of Scene Builder, everything on the left is basically things you can drag and drop onto your scene. Everything on the right is basically the configuration of it. So right now we just have an anchor pane. And if I look at that anchor pane, the layout of it, you can see it's 600 by 400, which is what we saw in that fxml file. So when you make modifications here, it will actually update that in the fxml file. So what I want is, I want sort of a series of, prompts. So it's going to be like first name, then some kind of text field to enter their first name and their last name, somewhere to enter their last name. So first we're going to do it with a default image, and then in a subsequent video I'm going to add in the ability to choose an image using a file chooser, and we're going to keep evolving this as we go along. So in this first video, it's going to be just about getting the basic data for our default constructor. So if we go back to our models, the simplest volunteer we could have is one where we have their first name, their last name, a phone number, and their birthday. So we're going to create that first. Now I like to use these containers so that I can position the elements in the inside of my GUI a little easier. So let's change the size of this a little bit, give us some more real estate to play with. Make it 800 by, say, 600. Now, I've dragged in a vertical box, and as you can see in the little picture there, what it does is as you add elements into this box, it'll just put them one on top of the other. So I'm going to right-click, go down to Fit to Parent, and now it's the whole size of this. And now I can add in some other things here. Be careful if you're doing desktop app to use the controls section. Some of these items down here, oops, are for mobile use. Okay, so first I'll put in a label. And let's call this create new user. And then we can add in, in the next section, what I'm going to do is I'm going to add in something called a horizontal box. And what this will do is it'll allow me to split the screen. So on one side I can have all my inputs, and the other part I can have a picture, upload of a picture. And oops. Inside of my horizontal box, I'm going to add something called a grid pane. And then this will allow me, so we'll add a row below. So this will allow me to do a few things here. So we can put in our labels. Name. Name. Keep your consistent phone number. Birthday. You can see this is pretty congested here. So right away, nice thing is because we have used things like such as the VBox and HBox, these containers. We can style those, and we can style them on our CSS, or we can style them in here. So for this, I'm just going to do it right in here. So if I say VBox layout, one of the things I can do is I can put padding all around. So maybe I'll do 20 pixels padding all the way around. And I can put spacing between the elements. So maybe I'll do 20 as well. So that's going to separate our label from here. The other thing is, this HBox, I can change the height of that pretty quickly. And I can change the width of these just by dragging things around. And next, what we need is areas to add in all of our data. So what we're going to do is pull in, scroll down here and grab some text fields. Now, the last one, the birthday, although you could technically use it as a text field, what the birthday requires is something called a local date object. So in our constructor, we said it'd be a local date. And users could type in the date so many ways, and they can make so many errors. So one of the things you can do is try to reduce the amount of typing a user does, because it reduces, so like, for example, what I did with phone here, because users make mistakes. So let's add in something called a date picker. The nice thing about the date picker is it can only create local date objects, and because it's picking from a calendar, you actually know that the dates are already validated. So it takes a lot of the risk out of it for us. And then what we're going to do here is we need a button to save our new user. So let's drag, let's create one more item in here, a different container. See which one we want. Maybe we'll put in an anchor pane so we can just position the buttons wherever we want for now. And put in a button. You see by default, it puts it in the upper left. With the anchor pane, wherever you position things is where it'll go. So here we can just type in save. Okay. So essentially our user will come, they can fill in this data, hit save, and ultimately what we want is that'll create a new instance of our user with our validation, and then we'll store it directly into the database without the user having to do anything else. So let's hit save here. Now, what we need to do, a couple things. One is we need to name these elements inside of our controller so that we can interact with them. And we need to create a method that when we click this button, it's going to read from these fields and try to create a new instance of a user. So let's get those things working. Let's go back into our controller. So here's our new user view controller. And in here, we're going to need to use or to set up our text fields. Let me just zoom a little bit here. I like to be very explicit with my naming conventions. So here I've literally called it first name text field. Although it's a little bit long, it does help down the way, especially if you have several fields doing similar things, to be very explicit as to what it includes. Okay, so there's our date picker. So be very careful if you see anything in here that says like AWT or swing, you may not have picked the correct text field or date picker. So be really careful with that. And then what we're going to need to do is create a method. Actually, let's connect these up. So we'll hit save. That saves it here. So now on my hard disk, I can actually, these files or these fields are defined. So when I go back into my scene builder, if I now click on this under code, I can actually see the FX IDs. So there's my first name. And again, by calling it text field, you can see it just sort of makes it a little bit easier here to know which is which. And we'll hit save. If you don't do this and you go try to launch your GUI, what you'll end up with is something called a null pointer exception, because you'll have defined these objects on your controller, but they're not connected to anything in your actual view. Okay, so that's updated. And here, let's create a method. I'm going to use this action event just yet, but I would like to put it in because we do need that if we're going to do things like change scenes. And it gets triggered automatically when you push the button. So, so here we can read from these fields directly. So what we're going to do is we're going to try create a new user, and then we can catch the exceptions. Now I'll just port them to the screen, but we can actually put that in. Let's add in a label here to our Xbox. Put it not inside of there. So the idea is that this label we can use to say if anything went wrong, we can tell our user. The other things we can do, maybe just from a style perspective, is we can say, let's center everything. And so I clicked on the V box here, properties, and you can set your alignment. And for this, since it's a title, let's make it bold. Okay, so our error message label, we'll set that to be blank to start. Whoops. So when we first come into this GUI, the text in it will just be an empty string. So it'll be invisible basically to user. There is an actual method called setVisible, but this has the same net effect, and then we don't have to make it visible and invisible and set the text. So what we're going to do here is say error message label text, and the text will be whatever the exception is. We'll get the message from the exception. And then here, what we'll try to do is we'll say volunteer. So we'll try to create a new volunteer. When we did it before, right, we used this style, right, where we said we're volunteer, we give the name volunteer equals a new volunteer. So it's actually even just copy this right in here. So this is our code that we know worked before. But instead of putting in Wilma as the first name, what we're going to do is we're going to look to our text fields, right? So I want to look here for the first name. So the user can actually, this is hard-coded as Wilma right now. So let's use that first name text field. So say first name text field. We'll say get the text. And then similarly, we can do the same thing with the last name. And the phone number. And their birthday. And then what we need to do is we need to, oh yeah, so that's a date picker object, so we need to get the value of it. There we go. Okay, save. So if we create the volunteer, now we can use it. We say volunteer, insert into the database. If there's an error, if one of our exceptions fails, then we can set the text. Okay. So now we need to connect this method up to our view, right? So this is our controller. We need to connect it with our view. So we go back in here. We're going to connect. We're going to go down to code. And here we can see on action, call this method. So if there's an action on this button, call that method. Similarly, we need to connect up our label here. Save. Now, the last thing that we need to do is create a method that will launch our GUI. So to do that, we'll create a method called main. Sorry, a class called main. And in here, we can launch our view. So this is all saved. So let's go into our views category, create a new Java class. We'll call it main. And what this will do is, we're all used to seeing something looks like this to start a program in Java. Public static void main. And we put our source code here. This would call other methods and things like that. Now, when you're using an FXML, or sorry, a Java FX package, what we're doing is we're creating a custom class here that extends, right? So this is a customized version of the application class. And there's at least one abstract method in here. So first, let's put in our imports, and then we're going to bring in all abstract methods. And you can see there's a special method called start. And what it receives as an input is a stage object. And a stage is synonymous with a window. This whole thing's a stage, so to speak. And what we do is we add scenes to the stage. So in our main method, what we're going to do is we're going to say launch. So launch is a method inside the application class. And it takes in this string array of arguments. And then what it's going to do is call the start method. So in here is where we put in the actual code to launch the view that we want to launch. So I'm going to say parent root equals fxml loader. Resource, and the resource we want to load is our fxml page. So it's this, we called it new user view, right? So new user view .fxml. That's what we want to load. And we have to import some things here. Okay. Now we can set the scene. So we're going to say scene. Add some more imports. Okay, so what this will basically do is load our fxml page. And that fxml page actually knows what its controller is. If we look at the fxml, we edit this. In here you can see it knows its controller. Let's zoom in a little bit here. Right, so it knows where to find its controller. So let's give this a run. We're going to save. Let's run this file. And up comes our little GUI, and you can see we set the title at the top here, which is new volunteer. And let's do a few things here. So I don't know, add Pebbles, Flintstone to our database. We'll do, first let's try if it's invalid, right? So we should get a message saying it's too young. And here we see volunteers must be 10 to 100 years of age. Let's go back a little bit further. Hit save. Okay. Our warning message goes away. And if we go into our database, so we had 2 users before. So go into our database. And if we run the command, now we have 3. We can see Pebbles is in there, and the image file is the default person.png file. So it worked. We tried it once with some invalid data. We got the error message. And then we tried it again with valid data, and it was stored in the database. So there you have it. We've created a GUI that allows us to add a user. In the next video, what we'll do is we'll add in a utility over here that allows the user to actually select an image from their file system, and then they can import it into our server and store it with unique file name, as we did in a previous video. All right, thanks very much.